Welcome to Settling the Score.
This week, the birth of Western classical music, Part 2. Hello, and welcome to Settling the Score podcast. I'm Brody.
And I'm Ronnie. And today we have reached the home stretch.
Yay!
We are finally there. This episode brings us up to the end of our background episodes. And the next time that our listeners hear from us, they will be hearing an official ranking episode. Our series will have begun.
Yep, if this was a marathon, I would be heavily chafed by now.
Do you remember in the beginning, I thought it was going to be 3 episodes?
Yeah, you thought it was going to be 3 episodes, but no, it turns out the first episode took us 3 recording sessions to do and split over 2 episodes.
Yes, that's right. And and it all started from there, and it was all downhill from there.
Yeah, we've done, about a dozen recording sessions so far, and we're almost to our first episode.
This is our 27th recording session.
27.
Yeah,
over
listeners,
2 dozen.
I thought that number seemed a bit high. I had been looking at our log earlier that day, and there were 27 entries in our log, including brainstorming sessions and landmarks. For Brody and I, this was actually our 18th recording session. Like I said, listeners, we've gone hard. We haven't slouched on this at all.
No,
we've been busy at it. But as you know, we discovered that we had a lot more content. And remember I said we had to get from primate vocalizations to Gregorian chant, and that's going to take us about 5 hours. Yeah. We thought that was a lot of time. Like, well, I hope the listeners will stay with us through this. But, it turned out to be much, much longer than that. And if you guys have stayed with us up until now, then just thank you so much, because it's been a rough go.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work. Involved in this, so much editing on your part, so much recording on both their parts.
Yep.
You've done so much amazing research, by the way. It's just very in-depth on all of these subjects.
Thank you. Yeah, and also on top of that, we've had tech failures and us getting sick. Brody got COVID and shingles in the course of this whole thing.
Yup.
But we straight up man-o-war'd that like we said we would, because we are here for all of you. And with that, we are going to move forward into this last stretch. So again, thanks for hanging in with us, and let's do this.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Okay. But before all of that, come on, listeners, you should know by now. Didn't mean to fake you out like that, but you should know by now we always start these things with a special RexiPod shout out. And this is a very special one. So, Primetime Podcast, as you may gather by the name, is a RexiPod ranking all of the prime ministers of Great Britain from Robert Walpole down to the present day. If you've ever wanted to know about the complex workings of the modern British political process, you can trace its evolution right down from the 17th century to about 5 minutes ago. And they've also got this side series called Prime Cuts, Brody, where they talk about modern political issues.
Oh, cool.
And use it to explain how the political process works over there. It's super helpful.
Now, I'm not super familiar with the way British politics works. However, I am a huge fan of watching Parliament, because they just scream at each other. They just berate each other.
Yeah.
Like, crowds just scream at each other to try to get stuff done. And I think we should really adopt that in the United States.
I mean, we already pretty much do that anyway.
Not the way they do.
No, that's true.
We take turns here.
That's true.
Yep. And if you don't shut up, they kick you out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they actually go into that in one of their Prime Cuts episodes on how British laws are made. Another thing, Primetime Podcast is also the other new kids on the block of RexiPods. They've only been out a little bit longer than us. So you could say we kind of have a special relationship, so to speak. Yeah. And I want to say that, honestly, the special relationship is really between the co-hosts. There are 3 of them, the only RexiPod with 3 co-hosts. And they are John, Rob, and Kess. They're all wonderful people. Their friendship is just so authentic and real.
Yeah.
You know, and like you can tell they just love being around each other and talking about this stuff. They're funny, they're witty, and they've got it all together.
Because they're British.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah. If this is not true, over here in America, we don't want our illusion dispelled that every person in Britain is clever and witty. Plus, and finally, they gave us a truly wonderful shout out on an episode that you guys will have, if you listen to both of us, you will have heard that a couple of months back. So hopefully we were able to give them a warm recommendation on our show. And now, Primetime Podcast.
How many medieval weapons are there in the Houses of Parliament?
Which Downing Street cat has caused the biggest diplomatic incident?
And why are so many MPs whipped regularly, and not just in their private lives?
I'm John.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Cass, and we're here to tell you all about the unhinged world of British politics.
We're ranking all the Prime Ministers from Robert Walpole to the modern day.
We'll be telling the story of each Prime Minister's life, legacy and premiership.
Extra cash, a dukedom, even a garter. No matter what they walked away with, we'll be casting judgment and deciding whether they are...
a right-on or a right-off.
We are Primetime Prime Ministers. And remember...
never flinch, never weary, never despair. And find us wherever podcasts are found.
If you only start listening to one RexiPod, Brody, just listen to them. They're great.
Audio update.
So before we begin, just to keep you all apprised as to our situation as we move forward into our final background episode, we have some pretty exciting audio updates for you guys as we slowly move ever closer towards our goal of being the greatest sounding podcast on all of the interwebs. So first of all, we finally got our mic positioning right, and I mean for real this time. So now we can turn the sensitivity down a bit so it won't be picking up so much background noise, so that should be getting better. Also, Brody has been on a bit of a sewing kick lately, so this is kind of funny because it's got some practical side benefits in that you can put up yarn and tapestries and all kinds of things in your recording space in lieu of studio foam, and it will do a wonderful job at damping for you. And as a matter of fact, we have a lovely display within the room right now, and I would feel somewhat guilty if we didn't give you a brief visual description. So, Brody, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know what our studio space looks like right now?
Yeah, so going across the top of the whole studio, I've got this big pink, black, and sparkly blue scarf that I made. It's about 20 feet long. It's quite a lot. Made a couple 20-foot long scarves, a bunch of them rainbow, and I kind of tacked them on the wall so they look like a little tiki head. Well, a big tiki head.
Giant tiki
and
head.
It really does help break up the sound reverb in here a lot. You know, it makes it a lot less of a reflective room.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm already hearing, like, already.
I'm noticing it too. It sounds a lot better. And then finally, the very last thing I'd like to tell you is that as of our next recording, which will be not Kerbalbulous, the very first ranking episode, we will be abandoning Brody's trusty portable recording studio, which has served us very well. But as of episode 1, we are going to be employing the same software that I use to edit these podcast episodes. That is Studio One. And there's a good reason for that. Studio One, you see, can record at 88.2 kilohertz, 24-bit depth. And we're going to need that in the event that high-res podcast streaming ever becomes a thing. Because as long as we can get things squared away with the rights holders, we'd like to offer this as a premium service to our patrons on whichever platform is first to the technology. Or else just find another way to make them available at that resolution. Now, this is twice as good as CD quality, which is 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit depth. Meaning that if you are that one crazy person out there with the Sherwin Vegas and you want to hear your podcasts in HD, that is what you'll get from us. And anytime we include any high-res samples, which we will try to do as often as possible, but they are a little bit pricey, so we'll see what we can do. But anytime we include those high-res samples, you will be able to hear them complete in their high-res format with no loss to the audio quality whatsoever. And no matter which feed you're subscribed to, we only use WAV files here, which are technically even better than lossless quality. So only the very best for our listeners. In fact, you have our solemn promise that we will never use an MP3 file unless it's a YouTube video and for whatever reason we weren't able to download the audio in WAV format. Long story short, it's a long-term project, and it may be years before anybody hears it. But the point is, we're starting to build that catalog now, and hopefully one day we'll be able to do something with it. As far as I know, we're the only podcast doing that. If there is another one out there, well, I just don't know about it. But I think we might be, if we're not the first, we're one of the first to this territory. So that's all. We're just really excited about all of this. And with all of that, I guess we can move on forward into the episode.
About the episode.
Okay, so we have finally truly made it to our very last background episode.
Yay!
Yes, we're really actually here. And this one is called From Convergence to Liturgence Part 2, Caesar to Charlemagne. We would have called it From Caesar to Charlemagne, but that would be a double from, and who wants that? No. I mean, that's just one extra word you'd have to sit through waiting for us to get to the point, which is like something like what we're doing right now, or something you're doing right now. So anyway, this episode should feel quite familiar to fans of the genre because this is the one that functions most like a normal background episode. We're not going to be doing any real cultural deep dives here. We're done with all of that. We've gotten through the episode that was meant to look at those 4 ancient cultures and examine them more deeply than we're going to do with anything here, which is somewhat unfortunate because we're coming up to the Romans, and I absolutely adore the Romans. The Romans are, for me, in all senses of the term, just my extended family, because we've done our genetic ancestry, and it looks like at least as far back as 1500 BC, we were in the Latium region of Italy, which contains Rome. So yeah, it's like I feel somewhat guilty having to rush through the Romans, but our point here is just we have to touch on Rome because Rome is going to play a major part of our narrative moving forward, so we should know something about the classical civilization of Rome. But at the same time, we also need to move forward to get to the narrative, and that's what this episode is about. So we've worked out a little bit of a compromise. We are going to do just a cursory overview of the Romans, a little quick run through, super quick run through their history, and just what music was like in the period roughly 100 BC to 100 CE. That's basically where we're floating around for this bit. And we'll just examine some of the interesting musical things going on at this time. And then after that, we will jump into the main course of this episode, which is the discussion of early Christian chant and how it developed and found its way ultimately to become Gregorian chant. And this is where we will see the conception and birth of Western classical music.
Ancient Rome.
Okay, so like I said, I'm not going to get into this. And I know I say that and then proceed to go way into the thing. Not this time, because first of all, this subject has been so thoroughly covered in the history podcast world. I mean, one of the founding history podcasts is Mike Duncan's History of Rome. It's still today one of the best history podcasts, one of the ones that everybody aspires to be as good as. And then, of course, you've got Totalis Rankium covering emperor by emperor. There's also a Roman Emperors series. There's so much on Rome because everybody is fascinated by Rome, and rightly so. But because there's so much on Rome, we're just not doing it. So just so that I can acquaint Brody with the broad strokes, here's the super quick run through of how Rome got from where it began to where it's going to be when it enters our story. According to the Romans themselves, they are the descendants of the survivors of the Trojan War. Aeneas fled after the war, and after a series of crazy adventures, lands in the region of Latium. His people mix with the Latins there. They become this Greco-Latin bunch, and then they have a bunch of descendants who essentially dominate that region. That's their version of the story. What the evidence shows is that the area that we now consider Rome, which was a collection of 7 hills, with this one central hill called the Palatine being the most important, was occupied at least as far back as 1200 BCE. It seems that the original wall of Rome, the earliest wall, was around 900 BCE, and that's very significant because the Romans themselves believed that their city was founded in May of the year 753. And I don't remember the exact date. I should know it off the top of my head, but it just escapes me right now. But they have an exact date that the city was founded on. And every year they celebrate the birthday of the great city. So the long story short is Rome has this long mythical period. It's mythical because Rome got destroyed one time, way back in around 387 BC. And because it got destroyed that time, all of its earlier records got wiped out. So they had to reconstruct their classical history from memory. The super quick version of that. There was a king named Numitor, who was the rightful king. He got ousted by his brother, but he had these 2 baby grandsons, and he wanted to protect them. So they were put in a basket. They kind of did like the Moses thing and left by the side of a river. They got discovered by a wolf, and then they were raised by the wolf. This wolf might have actually been a prostitute, because wolf is also a term that was used for prostitute in those days. So God knows who it was, but they might have also been suckled by a real she-wolf, because that's certainly cooler.
Much cooler.
The boys' names were Romulus and Remus, and they eventually got the throne back for their grandfather. If you want to know more about that, go and check out the shows I've been mentioning. Once they got the throne back, well, they started this city called Rome. It was called Rome and not Remus because Romulus killed Remus. Why did he do that? Well, go back and check those other shows and you'll find out. So anyway, Romulus's town is this haven for criminals and lowlifes for a while until they gradually find creative ways to bring women in. And over time, they eventually become a local power and are able to fend off all the other small tribal confederations in their area. They're constantly improving their military tactics and thinking one step ahead of everybody else. So even though it takes them hundreds of years to do so, they eventually do become a power in the region. But first of all, they have to throw off these old kings who are completely tyrannical from that mythical period. They ruled from about 753 BC with Romulus all the way down to 509 BCE with Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. He was a tyrant. They didn't like that. He did some horrible things. You can find out about those in these other episodes. They overthrew him in 509 BCE and started the world's first republic. It might not have really been 509 BC, but yes, it was, because it was 1 year earlier than Athens. So take that, Athens. Rome is better. And Rome is going to prove it's better in 197 BC as well. But we'll get to that in a split millisecond. So, early times, it was a big division between the two classes. They had patricians and they had plebeians. The patricians were the rich people who, well, originally they were the rich people, but they didn't have to be rich. You could be a poor patrician later. It was just that you could trace your family back to one of the original families that settled the city with Romulus, if he was a real person. But they were the best, and they were the ones who ran the city, and they were the ones who were allowed to be consul, which was like essentially the equivalent of president for a year. There were 2 of those. They were military guys. Anyway, long story short is there's a whole bunch of struggle between the patricians and these people called the plebs, who was everybody else, until eventually some things got balanced out, and they had a nice balanced political system that is sort of the ancestor of all the republics of today. While they were at it, they cleared out all their enemies from the local vicinity and eventually took over the peninsula, got into a fight with this place called Carthage. You'll learn about that in these other shows. The punchline of all of this is that Rome rapidly grows and becomes the most powerful empire, not only in the region, but that the world has ever seen. After this battle to the death with this other growing empire, the Carthaginian Empire in the Punic Wars, which is where we get the stories of Hannibal and Scipio Africanus, who listeners will know about. This is sort of a great epic time in Roman history. And this is when Rome becomes the world power. And shortly after that, like I said, in 197 BC, there's this other battle that took place in Greece where basically the Roman army proved the superiority of their military tactics. After this, as you can imagine, Rome became spectacularly wealthy, and they pretty much owned the entire region of everything from Spain in the west all the way out to Judea and Syria in the east. It was a vast, sprawling empire. In parts of Africa, eventually they had taken Egypt. And after lots of local civil wars, which is where you'll hear the stories of such classic Roman figures as Marius, Sulla, and Julius Caesar, the old republic fell, and one man rose to power. He called himself Augustus, and he was the first emperor of Rome. And essentially, we are coming into Rome right now in the period of the very end of the Republic and very early days of the Empire. At this point, Judea had long since been freed by the Maccabees from the oppressive hand of Antiochus IV. And with the collapse of the absurdly chaotic Seleucid Empire, Jews were no longer under pressure to Hellenize. That is, act like Greeks. Because, as you know, Rome is now in charge of that area. This is why in the very early days, the Jews did see the Romans as liberators and as friends, and that relationship only soured over time. In fact, Augustus considered, aside from his best friend that he grew up with, Agrippa, his other best friend in the world, you could say his second best friend, certainly his best foreign friend, was King Herod, the Roman appointed king over Judea. Now, of course, Herod had Roman blood, but that's another story, and I don't want to get too much into that, because then we would be getting far afield. But that's my super rushed version of the history of Rome from the beginning until now. And I hope it wasn't too rushed, but I imagine all of you listeners already know most of this stuff. Some of you later on will be from the classical music crowd rather than the history crowd, but right now I know most of our listeners are from the latter, so there we go. That's the Roman timeline. Now, let's just jump right into the important stuff. Brody?
Roman attitudes about music.
Let's start by dispelling a couple of misconceptions. Misconception number 1. There is a common belief that ancient Rome made no real meaningful contributions to the world's musical heritage, having merely ripped off the Greeks for everything they had. But that is just a bunch of bullwash. See, the Romans did adopt a huge swath of Greek musical theory and practice, and they built pretty much everything they had on top of it. But they also did make some unique contributions, and have left behind some very valuable information that, to my knowledge anyway, the Greeks did not. Misconception number 2. It's often said that ancient Romans had a negative attitude towards music, on the whole, that they thought it was something very licentious and effeminizing, and they didn't like musicians in general. This is true in a sense, but it's not true in a universal sense. What it comes down to is they felt this way about the theater and about professional entertainers, but we'll get to that in a second. Ancient Roman attitudes about music on the surface seem to be quite contradictory. On the one hand, music is ennobling. On the other hand, it's crass and degenerate. This isn't really a contradiction, though, because music comes in all forms and contexts. The factors determining whether a musician or a style of music is going to be seen as ennobling or degenerate are things like the social class of the performer, the gender of the performer, the nature of the music, and the purpose for which it was used. The Romans certainly understood the power and the emotive nature of music. They understood that music could speak to the emotions in a way that spoken words by themselves just cannot. And so the ancient Romans believed music was a powerful tool capable of inciting strong emotions. And that was why they had to be careful about it. Cicero and Aristides Quintilianus saw music as capable of ennobling the populace, specifically, and they encouraged its dissemination among the populace for that reason. Quintilian considered music, quote, the most beautiful art and essential for reading ancient poets properly. So if you don't know your music, you don't really know how to read your ancient poets. And that's important. So the next thing is preservation of traditional music. Now, Cicero praises the superior quality of traditional Roman music over the present Roman music, and that's quite understandable. You see, archaic Roman music is described as civilizing the barbaric, and in many ways it really was, because some of the earliest Roman music in those days was just military music. Lots of drums and trumpets and just big, loud, scary stuff. That's not just what he means, but it's certainly the sound that the barbarians, as they called them, would have heard. And by this point, we're just talking about those people who were living barbarically outside of Rome, the people who were living backwardly and needed the love of Romulus in their lives. They didn't have Jesus yet, so they just brought the love of Romulus. They had a nickname. They said that they were going to go and Romulate the planet. Actually, they didn't, but I think they should have, because it's a great word. Anyway, there was a common belief in the Roman world that traditional styles of music should be maintained, and that they were somehow inherently better than popular music styles. Like, popular musicians and just the common people understood that too, that like there is certain music that's of a higher quality and character. However, Pliny mentions musicians adapting their art based on popular demand. This is something that Plato would not have approved of. So this is the idea that even though musicians might have looked at certain types of music that were traditional as being music that should not be changed and should be maintained, they also had other types of music that were more popular that you could change and you could do all sorts of things with. And there's an interesting quote here from Cicero about all this. Quote, "Me, I'm a Plato cat. See, Plato, he dug on some good trad jams, and that's what I'm about. Modern music used to be good, but nowadays the young people just swinging off the lights, barking for the yak lady, and jumping through hoops of real fire. Plus
Ron, that's Lord Buckley.
Wait. No, it can't be. He loved modern music.
Yeah, but he said it's not modern anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, look, to be fair, neither was anything Cicero was digging on. I mean, Anyway, I'm sorry about that, listeners. Here's the real quote, outside of beat slang. Quote, "For I agree with Plato that nothing so easily flows into young and impressionable minds as the various notes of the musical scale. It is hard to express the extent of their power in one way or the other, for music animates the indolent and calms the excited. It causes spirits to relax at one moment and then restrains them the next. Many states in Greece considered it important to preserve the ancient style of music. Yet their morals changed along with their songs and slid into decadence as a result. Either they were corrupted by the sweet seductiveness of music, as some people think, or once the stringency of their morals were undermined by their other vices, then their ears and minds became changed, leaving room for this musical change also. For this reason, the wisest and by far the most learned man in Greece was greatly afraid of this decline. For he denies that the laws of music can be changed without heralding a change in the laws of the state. However, I, for one, do not think that this should be feared so greatly, although it should not be overlooked either. Indeed, we see how the theater, which once used to be filled with the tunes of Livius and Naevius, pleasing in their simplicity, is now filled with people who leap up and toss their heads and roll their eyes in time with the twists and turns of the music. In the old days, Greece used to punish such behavior harshly, anticipating far in advance how the deadly plague might sink gradually into the minds of citizens and suddenly overturn entire states with evil pursuits and evil ideas. I was supposed to say at the beginning of this, by the way, this is going to be a somewhat lengthy quote, and maybe I will just trim it down in the edit. But did you follow all of that, what he was saying?
A bit of it. That was quite a long quote.
So, yeah. So if we summarized it, essentially what he was saying is that it's like a chicken or egg argument. Either the morals change and then the music changes, or the music changes and the morals change. One way or the other, it's probably something we need to be vigilant about, but we also don't need to necessarily freak out about it and see it as the end of civilization, but something that we want to guard against.
And that sentiment resonates to this day.
Yep. And it's exactly that. Every generation, you have the older generation saying there's something crazy that the younger generation is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And every time, it's always got to do with taking greater risks and things that ultimately become seen as innovative later, that in the time are shocking and even seen as morally wrong. But then later on, they become the status quo.
Yep.
You look at like rock and roll, for example.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Cicero also believed that musical education could help politicians improve their listening skills and detect imperfections. So basically, as long as music didn't turn you into a wild degenerate or a girly boy, the old-time daddies were all right with it.
Gender dynamics in music.
One thing that might come as a surprise to listeners is that female musicians were actually highly respected compared to their male counterparts. This is because women are supposed to be girly, you understand. And so it was viewed as an actual potential enhancement of a woman's attractiveness. So when a woman was single and of marriageable age, the idea was that by that point, she should have a certain number of womanly graces cultivated to attract a good husband. And one of them was to be able to play charming music, because this might sound a little crass, but it increased her entertainment value, essentially. This is also why there's also a little bit of a slippery slope where it wasn't to be too strongly encouraged. And of course, the instruments should be dainty and feminine instruments. But if it was too strongly encouraged, it could go the wrong way, because prostitutes were also known to play musical instruments very well. And indeed, the higher quality ones were expected to. The idea was, of course, that this increased her entertainment value. It's very crass. It's a very awful way to look at women, but this is ancient history. This is how the world worked. It's just how it was. So, and this is the other thing. Yeah, however, if they were too good, they might give off the wrong impression that they were prostitutes because, hey, she's trying to impress guys that much. She must be advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Cicero says that musical behavior is inappropriate for married women because it sends the wrong impression. You get it? It's like they're saying they're not happy with their marriage, so now they're advertising for a man.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's weird, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Being too good of a female musician makes people be under the assumption that you're a prostitute. That's a fun time to live in.
Yeah, great times. Sorry, ladies. It's like we said back in ancient Sumer. At least you had that one good thing. You had that one win at the beginning with the earliest named musician in history. But then the bastard Romans go and turn it around and be like, well, yeah, I guess.
That's great. Last night I watched the episode King of the Hill where they find out that Arlen, Texas, the town they live in, was founded by prostitutes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's funny. How did they deal with that?
Well, they opened a big attraction called Harlot Town, where basically you go to learn about the fact that basically all the founders of the town were prostitutes, and Hank tries to shut it down because, it's too much for him.
Yep.
But in the end, he meets someone who's a porn star who's getting an award at the Adult Film Awards they're going to host there.
Well,
and kind of changes his mind on those kinds of people.
It's nice that it has a nice ending like that.
Oh, yeah. Real good moral ending. Don't judge too quickly.
Yeah, so ladies, if you were married and you wanted to play music, just make sure you do it behind closed doors because you don't want people thinking that you're out there having an affair. Now, weird as all that sounds, just remember, when there is a widely held belief structure like that, people do play the game. So this is why Ovid, who loved the idea of extramarital affairs, encouraged married women to play music as often as possible in public. So anyway.
Setting and context.
Ancient Roman music was always created for practical purposes. There were 4 broad categories of musical usage in Roman society: military, religious, public entertainment, and private concerts. Ancient Romans had different attitudes towards each type of music, and were very particular about who should or shouldn't be playing in which category, with certain genres and performance types being appropriate to each societal class or biological sex.
Military music.
As we stated earlier, this is the earliest Roman music attested to in the sources. They used a type of trumpet called a cornu, which is kind of like a giant rolled tubed trumpet. It actually looks like it should be an early tuba, but we'll get to that in a second with the instruments. But they did also use other instruments such as the early tuba and cymbals and loud frame drums for signaling military formations and things like that. Also, during military triumphs held for great generals upon their successful completion of a campaign, trumpets were used to announce the arrival of the triumphator. Then, tubas were used throughout the ceremony.
Religious music.
Religious music came in a number of varieties, and there were different musical contexts within religious practice. So for one thing, it could be used as an accompaniment for sacrifice. Now, the tibia is considered a crucial instrument in the Roman imperial cult. So this is how do we even describe it? Sort of like a long wooden drone instrument. And this was often used to set the rhythm of the ritual and invoke specific emotions, almost kind of like the same function that a didgeridoo would do or something like that. But at the same time, it had more melodic possibilities than just the one tone, but was still typically used as a type of a drone. There were also these people called tibicines, and they were the players of the tibia, and they featured very prominently in the ancient Roman art surrounding sacrifices. This is how we know that the tibia was used in those sacrifices. Music could also be used for public prayer, and the preferred instrument that we see in the artwork and that we read in many of the ancient sources showing up for this is the pipes, and oftentimes even panpipes.
Deity cults.
Just like with the Sumerians, Egyptians, Indians, and Greeks, the ancient Romans associated different instruments and activities with specific gods. So the flute was played in honor of Mars, and it accompanied the dancing of Salian priests, whereas cymbals and rattles were used in the worship of Isis, a goddess literally imported from Egypt. And this is actually one of those neat things about ancient Rome, is that it was a polytheistic marketplace for all sorts of different gods and cults. As we're going to find out when we get into our Christian chant section, you're going to find out that basically these religious cults in ancient Rome, it was like fast food restaurants today. They were just on every street, every different god, every deity had their own cult, and they imported a lot from far away. Well, the goddess Isis from ancient Egypt was pretty important, and she was associated with lots of drums, lots of loud, smashy things.
Nice.
So sometimes you knew you were passing an Isis cultic temple because there would just be certain types of symbols that you knew, oh, those are the Isis symbols, you know. That was back when Isis had a different meaning.
Public events.
Of course, music was also used to get the crowd's attention and as a call to silence in public ceremonies. So, basically sonic crowd control. So there was the existence of these groups called collegia, and these were guilds dedicated to educating musicians through an apprenticeship. And one of the most elite of these collegia was the Collegium Symphoniacorum, which played at most of the major religious and official ceremonies. So, just like in ancient Egypt, they had specific schools that were set aside for training those high-class musicians. And we're not going to go into too much more than that, but just note that these musicians were used in the highest, high-functioning stuff. We'll figure it out.
Private musical concerts and festivals. Entertainment music.
Games and gladiators. So another thing was that the signal to fight at the beginning of a gladiator game was often given by horn blast, and the music would play throughout the games and the fights and races, so they used it there. But really where Roman music really kind of shines, and the area that all those old-time philosophers and statesmen had a big problem with, was the theater. Because, you know, when ancient Roman writers are comparing music to prostitution, what they're usually talking about is theater music. They don't like the theater, man. No, a lot of them loved the theater, but they didn't like that they loved the theater. And then a bunch of other ones, like Cicero, just didn't like the theater because it was overrun by crazy people now instead of people playing Livius like they should be doing. So, look, this is what I figured. They took one good look and listened to those Broadway actors, and they just knew they were dealing with a bunch of sexual degenerates. You know, I mean, come on. They had to be, right? If you're that happy all the time, and you know, if you're in that good a mood all the time, and you're using your body to entertain, remember your voice is part of your body, and so you're using your body to entertain. And so even though it's just singing and acting and dancing to us, to the ancient Romans, it's like, well, you're using your body to entertain me. That's kind of like being a whore. Mm-hmm. By the way, sorry to single you out, Broadway peeps. We know you're all actually really upstanding Roman citizens who always save yourselves for marriage like you're supposed to. Not that there was Broadway in ancient Rome, but hey, you know, particulars. Also, look, this is also why like so many of the upper class types look down on Nero. So like some of the things when they talk about Emperor Nero being mad, well, some of it was for really sick stuff, like lighting Christians on fire and using them for candles at his parties. You know, that's a little bit much. A little much, yeah. Yeah, probably do without that. But on the other hand, the thing that they complained about the most was that he was an actor and a theater musician, and he was getting down and dirty with the dregs of society, singing and acting and playing all these different instruments, and it was scandalous. It would be like today if the president of the United States went and did a porn film. Wow. That's how it hit the ancient Romans.
I mean, we're pretty close to that these days.
You think so?
Pretty close. I mean, hey, not going to get into it. We're not a political podcast.
Oh, yeah. Oh, are you referring to a certain quote from a certain reality TV show, shall we say, from the early 2000s? No? Okay.
But anyways. Yeah, it's kind of crazy that guy is so in touch with his musical side, but also he's like inventing Roman candles.
Yep.
Is that where the term Roman candles come from, when he would light Christians on fire?
I guess it is now. Oh, boy.
The original Roman candle?
The original Roman candle was quite grim, folks. No, well, there were other Roman candles before that. But that was certainly a type of candle used by a specific Roman that we can be happy is no longer in use. I believe that there are certain restrictions preventing any countries, at least who are members of the United Nations, from doing things like that. Mm-hmm. Even though who knows where we're going. Anyway, we're not a political podcast, so we're not going to talk about Guantanamo Bay or anything like that either. Nope. So, you know, they're always show, dude. They're never not a show. Even when they're good, they're still a show. Yep. I promise you the second session of this is going to be a lot better. And once we get to the instruments in a second, it's going to pick up. So that said, how was music used in theater? Well, in many ways, pretty much the same ways that it's used today. It was used to convey emotions and traits of the characters. It was used for pacing the story. Sometimes you had choruses who would actually back up the action or would comment on it, like in ancient Greek tragedy, and sometimes in certain comedy, but typically in tragedy. It also served as a memory aid for the audience, because if the audience knew the tunes, then it helped them remember the story and they could tell the story later and pass it on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Roman theater was a lot more like what we think of today as traditional plays and pantomime. So, like, the actors themselves didn't typically sing, although later on it seems like there were singing actors that came in, and Nero obviously wanted to be part of that as well. But initially, it was all pantomime where you had someone else singing in the background and the actors portraying what was being sung. And the singing was done by a chorus of singers, oftentimes with an orchestra of wind and percussion instruments behind them, accompanying the plays. The actors did dance, however, and speaking of dance, well, we do know a bit, and if you want to know a bit, you can go look it up, because we're not getting into it here. All we're going to say is that the dance music definitely didn't sound like this.
This time I wanna get down, I wanna get down. This time I wanna get down, I wanna get down. This time I wanna get down, I wanna get down. This time I wanna get down. No bad boys, no champagne, no false love, no mind games, no scandal, no boxes, no labels, no ice cream, no candy, no too hot to handle me, no cigarette, just alcohol sliding easy down my throat. No French kiss, no ooh la la, my fake tan, my Shangri-La, no chit chat, no slap on the back. Show me who you are, I like you. I feel your love on the dance floor.
As for the singing, however, I think we can confidently say that they had parallel organum, like in the beginning of that song. But yeah, you're not going to get that kind of bass until we hit the 21st century. Sorry. By the way, that's all you get of that piece. You're welcome. Anyway.
Roman musical education. Singing practice routines.
Interestingly enough, this is one of the areas where the Romans have provided us with something that the Greeks didn't. With the Greeks, while we do have a lot of instruction on how music was to be written, and we do have some aesthetic guidance for how music was to be sung, we don't really have actual training. We don't have a lot. We have a very little bit of scattered references to how singers were trained. The Romans, it's the same thing. It wasn't like anybody was really trying to keep great records of how singers were trained. It just seems that the luck of the draw is that historically, the Roman writings that did mention things about singer training were better preserved than the Greeks. For all we know, the Greeks wrote a lot more and just didn't preserve their stuff as well. But one way or the other, the way it's come down to us is that we do know a bit more about how Roman singers warmed up and practiced and what they actually did in order to sing. And to me, this is the most interesting thing about, aside from the chant tradition and how all that coalesces, which is the real exciting story. But aside from that, to me, this is the second most exciting thing, because it makes me wonder how much of this then carries over to the Christian chants. You know, because we know that some of these early Christian cantors were competing with these pagan collegia, or trying to. And so would they have used some of their methods? Oh, it's so, you know, those are the questions we'll never know the answer to, but oh, I love that stuff. So here's an overlap there. Anyway, so even though it comes to us by way of all these separate sources, there's enough information that we can weave a nice thread, you could say. We can tell a nice yarn.
Yeah.
We could sew a room full of yarns and hang them in a studio. And guys, you know what? We'll put some pictures of this up, won't we?
Yeah, we'll be getting photographs of our studio online shortly.
Yeah, let's just say it's going to be a nice visual component to our podcast pretty soon, by way of the camera guy over here.
Yep.
Warm-up exercises and preparations.
So we have descriptions of singers performing warm-up exercises, including vocalized successive sounds before singing. So things like
la 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 la.
Yep. Or they might do certain vowel sounds from a high pitch to a low sound. So I won't do this super loud, but like an E-A, 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 E-A. So they would do things like that to relax their vocal cords and to get nice resonance, and that way it excites the harmonics in the vocal cords. It gets them nice and loose and ready. Here's a good one though. Here's the one I've been looking forward to telling you about. We have the Emperor Nero's vocal training techniques.
Ooh.
We know what he did. So first of all, his training method included what I just did, but it also had a dietary component. There were certain fruits and drinks that he would avoid because if it was too much citrus, it would make his voice crack. And he avoided dairy because obviously dairy makes you phlegmy, you know, not something we need an ancient historian to explain to us. He would also, though, he would purge himself with vomiting and enemas, which is a little extreme, but his whole idea was this. If I don't have all these fluids in my body that could be making burping and nasty noises, if I flush everything out, I'm going to be a clear, clean vessel for the gods to speak through.
All right, I can follow that train of thought, yeah.
Or just, to be my party animal self. But one way or another, I'm the emperor and I'm the greatest artist who ever lived. And I'm such a diva and a prima donna. I need to have the best voice and I'm going to do what I need to freaking do to have that. And you're going to remember me as the greatest artist who ever lived first and then as the greatest emperor who ever lived. Because it's just like we had that back with King Shulgi. I just want to play my lyre.
Yeah.
But Nero is like, I just want to play my lyre, but in lieu of that, I'll just burn a couple Christians, say that I'll burn some of Rome with my friends and then be like, oops, well, can't have that come back. Let's blame these weirdos from the East. They look foreign. Anyway, he would lie on his back with a lead sheet on his chest and he would try singing his scales. And he would keep adding weights. And every time he would add a weight, he would try to sing the scale a little bit higher. And a little bit higher. And the idea was that it was slowly to help push his voice up higher. It's quite interesting. Also, something that was said that to be done very gradually and incrementally. So each day you add a little bit more. Obviously you don't want to push yourself.
Yeah.
He would sometimes hang from the side of his bed upside down. And he would try to expand his diaphragm that way. He would hold his breath for as long as he could. He would take in slow inhales and even slower exhalations. He would try singing in difficult positions, like in a handstand. So anything that he could do to just make sure that his voice could withstand anything his body was doing.
That's smart.
It's smart. So as crazy as he was, we might say, now, he's obviously the emperor, so he's able to get advice from some of the best physicians and the best singing instructors of those times. And obviously, while ancient medicine and understanding of human physiology was certainly hurting, they didn't even have Galen yet. I mean, this is like really, really early stuff in terms of medical advancement.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little hoarse today. Throw some leeches on it.
That's all. It's always leeches.
Yeah, you got too much blood in your throat.
But there were certain things that the ancients did really understand. There were certain medicines that they did have down. They had some basic stuff down. And if you think about a warrior culture too, like the Romans, or these very physically active peoples that the ancients were, they were very aware of their bodies, very in tune with what was going on. So it shouldn't surprise us very much at all that this should carry over to the singers.
Yeah, they knew how to strengthen and tone their bodies in a bunch of different ways.
Mm-hmm. And it's just exciting to know about this. Now, here is something that, here's the last piece to it. So Nero also used something called a penile fibula. It is a device that we cannot describe on this episode because we will lose our clean rating and we might skirt very close to the edge, but we don't want to cross that edge. So, Brody, I'm going to tell you what a penile fibula is. And listeners, all you need to know is it is a slightly more painful version of something that rhymes with Rock King. So, Brody, Here we go. A penile fibula is foremost, this is from Wikipedia, is foremost a ring attached. It was also believed to help preserve the voice because there was a concept in ancient cultures that the preservation of certain fluids that may contain life essence was going to keep you younger for a while. So even though Nero loved his orgies and sex, he would apparently go through long periods of fasting from any kind of relief, as it were. And one of the ways to do that was to just kind of block things off a little bit. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. So really intense stuff. Again, these are the ancient times, so you can expect things to be quite over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And now here we go. We are going to wrap up the Romans with just the instruments and then a quick little something special that I prepared at the end. So you all know the drill by now. We've already only been able to survey top levels of instruments of different cultures. We went a little ham with Sumeria and I think with India in particular. Those two got a lot of love. But with this, I'm going to tell you about a bunch of instruments that they had, but we're only going to listen to 3 of them. because there's only 3 of them that I think are specifically so Roman that they kind of jump out, and we haven't heard them yet, because a lot of the instruments that we're going to be talking about we have heard. In fact, we've already heard one of these 3 as well, but I think you'll see why we're showcasing it again. It should be mentioned, while pre-Christian Rome may not have had the same level of influence on the musical heritage of the West as Greece did, their instruments have been found in archaeological sites covering the entire geographical span of the empire, suggesting that the Roman styles of instrument making certainly did spread throughout the provinces. So it might not be the kind of influence the Greeks had, but at least their engineering skills were certainly coming in handy. Because if there were 2 things the Romans did well, it was taxation and engineering. They had those down.
Yep.
So here we go.
Winds.
Well, the Roman tuba for starters. It's a long, straight bronze trumpet with a detachable conical mouthpiece, similar to the modern French horn. They tend to be a little bit more acoustically limited than modern horns because they don't have valves, and so obviously all the pitches have to be made by pursing your lips. If you want really high pitches, you need to have a brain hemorrhage. And therefore also limited to the single overtone series. It wasn't really easy. You couldn't have an octave cheat code. If you wanted those high pitches, like I said, get a stroke, have a brain embolism. Embolism. Envelope. Have an envelope. Hello? Are you over there?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if you disappeared into thin air. Well, remember, our podcast is so dope. Remember that chick who wrote to me? The SJ1? Our podcast is so lit that people pop into existence. I just wanted to make sure it doesn't cause people to disappear.
Pop out of existence.
Yeah. Especially you. Maybe that's her outtake. I don't know what the. So, anyway, these tubas were, as we mentioned earlier, originally for military usage, and you don't really see them outside of that, except that they do have a sort of ritual connotation with any sort of religious ceremonies connected to the god Mars. Weirdly enough, Roman tubas could be tiny little things like the one you're about to hear. So this one is not much larger than a Baroque trumpet, but that doesn't stop it from having a big, deep, masculine voice, just like the Romans would have wanted. And Brody, you can finally come over in here and see something. That's a Roman tuba.
Wow.
Not what you were expecting, huh?
Nope.
And here comes this guy contradicting me, playing high notes like it's easy. It's not easy. It's just that this guy is quite good. Remember, there were good trumpeters who could play crazy high notes during the Baroque as well. I mean, somebody had to be that force of nature who could play the clarino trumpet part in the Second Brandenburg Concerto. A piece about which there are documented cases of players getting headaches and nosebleeds and the like, trying to play up in that range for too long. Anyway, Roman tuba player, stop playing so well. You're making me look bad. This isn't future Ronnie, by the way, but I do think that past Brody has some commentary coming up right now, effectively providing a smooth transition back to the original recording.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to be that high-pitched. In the beginning, it sounded like a dying yak. That's a cool instrument. It's just a straight bugle.
Yeah, it's basically a bugle, as you just pointed out, as both the aesthetic and the literal ancestor to the bugle. So the Roman tuba is the direct ancestor of the modern bugle. And that's why you were hearing essentially bugle calls on it. Now, the next Roman instrument that we're going to look at is called the cornu. I mentioned that one earlier too. And this is also a military instrument. So the cornu was a bronze trumpet that frequently accompanied the tuba. Weirdly enough, some of these were bigger than the tubas, but sounded considerably higher. Other ones could sound considerably lower. This monster is going to have a bit of an overlap. And by the way, this one that we're about to hear is a replica of a fully preserved cornu discovered in the ashes of Pompeii. So you know about Pompeii, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, Brody is on this side of the table now so he can see the video. Just in case someone out there somehow doesn't know, Pompeii is the ancient Roman resort island that drowned in pyroclastic lava flows when Mount Vesuvius went off in 70 CE. And basically, since everything got sealed off when Vesuvius erupted, it became this time capsule where nothing deteriorated, no bacteria could eat away at things. It just all stayed preserved. And now it's like this living monument to what Roman life was like in the late 1st century, at least on a resort island. And people can still go there to this day. One of the many things that was preserved by way of this catastrophe was this beautiful instrument that we're looking at right here. This is an exact replica of a working cornu that was discovered in Pompeii.
Well, that looked like something straight out of Dr. Seuss. Yeah, that was a delightfully goofy horn instrument. Was it like 5 feet and a giant hoop? That was really cool.
It almost looks like somebody did something horrible to the wheel of a unicycle. At least to me, because I'm low vision. It's very circular, isn't it? Very hoop-like.
Very.
Yeah. Of course, now, that might have sounded a bit more powerful than the tuba that we heard because this was a bronze instrument. Now, these instruments are very limited in what they can do melodically. There were a lot of melodic instruments, and you're going to hear them in a minute, and something kind of special I prepared for the end of this. But if we'd like something a bit more melodic and perhaps a little bit more demonstrative of the engineering spirit of the Romans, one thing that I found out as I was doing a little bit more research, you remember the water organ that we looked at last time?
Yeah.
With the ancient Greeks? Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that it's not entirely settled whether this was a Greek musical invention or a Roman one, because while there seem to be some references to something like this in the Greek literature, we don't actually see one turn up until Roman times, and the earliest one does appear in Rome, and then the next earliest one appears in ancient Greece. This is a reconstruction of a real Roman hydraulus that was actually used in the bathhouses, which makes plenty of sense. You got working plumbing, you got running water, so if this thing is running through using water, then you got it all around you. This is also considered to be, because it's so sophisticated and has so many complicated parts, it's considered to be one of the great engineering accomplishments of the ancient world. Believe it or not, is this musical instrument. I mean, it's not the Antikythera mechanism, but it is pretty complex. So if you want to come over here, you will actually get a chance to see something that you didn't see on the last video. You'll actually see how the water is fed into it.
Ready? Yeah. Right, here goes.
Yeah, that was cool to be able to actually see how that thing worked.
So how would you describe it now?
I think the same as I described it last time. Water pump hooked up to a bunch of tubes.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, you can see how it worked this time. So you could actually see the water like underneath of it. And yeah, it's just a good old-fashioned bellows. So, all right. That's it for the instruments. What we are going to do right now, in order to show you and to give you a much more fulfilling, I think, picture of what the Roman musical world actually sounded like, rather than me explaining all the different instruments as we've been doing, I have gone through and selected a number of pieces from a couple of very fine Roman music reconstruction ensembles and created a collage that I hope will give the vibe of a kind of musical walking tour of ancient Rome. If you love this music, who could blame you? Also, there are album links in the show notes, because there are always links in the show notes. The first one is Sonalia, and we're going to be hearing excerpts from their Music of Ancient Rome, Volumes 1 and 2. We are also going to be hearing Ludus Senecae, and this is E Tempore Emerge, which is recorded in Rome, Italy in 2001. We also have something from their Festima Lente album. We also have one selection from the ensemble Kyrillos, which is an ensemble featuring director Annie Bellis, and they are an ensemble specializing in the reconstruction of ancient Greek music, but every now and then they'll do a little Roman stuff too. So the way we're going to wrap up the Romans, listeners, is that Brody and I are going to jump off and we are going to watch a brief 10-minute YouTube video called Popular Music in Ancient Rome. Then I'm going to play him a couple of the pieces that you are going to hear in this collage that I have assembled for you. And that will be it for the Romans, and we'll cruise on to the main event, the birth and development of Christian chant. By the way, if you want to watch that 10-minute video, I think you know where to look for it.
Clare nepos Atlantis, Hades, quem montibus olim, ed idit Arcadis pleias una Iovi, pacis et armorum superis imisque deorum, arbiter alato qui pede carpis iter.
ljuset. Parkuhi hemnahi. Partahanuhi zenihi sutesh. As. Hankuo semseki.